So it's almost time for our class to begin, and we'll be in Matthew 25 to start this morning. So if you want to find a Bible or a device, and we'll begin our study together in Matthew 25. So you want to pass your final, Brother McNeese, you better get your book. So that's the way it goes in this class. So. When we were going through Matthew 24, and we were trying to figure out what Jesus was talking about when he said the abomination that causes desolation, I showed a slide that had a picture of this golden eagle. And the golden eagle was part of the ensign or standard that was used by some of the Roman legions. Instead of having flags, I showed a picture, maybe I talked about cloth flags that we know about today, and historically armies have used cloth flags. But if you go all the way back to the Roman army, they didn't have cloth flags per se. They had these symbols that were mounted on a pole. And so to bring this graven image into Jerusalem was horrible for the Jews. That was the abomination that, in the case of the Roman army, caused desolation. Anyway, sing song and Ming. This golden eagle that I showed a picture of was an actual Roman standard. It was found by archaeologists, and it's in a museum in Cleveland. So next time you go to visit David in Cleveland, you can inquire about going to the museum where you can see this Roman standard from Bible times. So anyway, there's lots of interesting things to see in Cleveland. Of course, the most interesting the thing you're most interested in seeing there is David. But anyway, I have big plans to go to Pittsburgh at some point in time, so maybe see the Pirates or the Steelers play or something like that, I don't know. Anyway, today we'll begin our study together, continue our study of Matthew 21 through 28. Surely he was the Son of God. Looking ahead, we're this last Sunday in July, and over the next few weeks, we'll be moving on into chapter 26 today, and then Brother Matt Shaner will teach a class a week from today as I'll be out of town. I'll be dealing with the last part of Matthew 26, which you and I call the Last Supper. Of course, this is really the heart of the gospel in a lot of ways, the story of Jesus' passion, his death, burial, and resurrection, his suffering. And we, frankly, won't finish that during the month of August. August is a month with 5 Sundays, and I think, I'm not sure about the date still, but I think it's the last 2 Sundays. We're going to have all of the adults and even the teenagers all together in the auditorium here, and we're going to take a course together, Oxford Church of Christ 101 orientation or whatever, and this is going to be a class that we're going to give again and again for new members. But just so we'll know what it's all about, and we'll all have a common footing, and we'll all be able to recommend and encourage newcomers to be a part of this class, we'll all take it together last part of August. So having said all that, it leaves us only about 3 Sundays after this Sunday, and we're not going to get through all of Jesus' death, burial, resurrection, the cross, the tomb, and the Great Commission, which is so important in that period of time. And we could kind of squeeze it in there, but I think what we'll do is we'll just continue that on in September. And if some of you who normally attend this class want to migrate into the rear foyer, I'm just doing shameless recruitment here. We'd be happy to have you come in there and finish the Gospel of Matthew with us. Okay, so this is something we got into last week, and I got some good comments after the class about this struggle between works and grace. And the book of Matthew in particular, and there are different places in the Bible that do this, but the book of Matthew in particular emphasizes works. And again and again, Jesus teaches things that have to do with our performance, and this is a big theme in so many of the parables. Of course, we're in a section here where we're studying one parable right after the other. And, he, in several of the parables that we've studied recently, he tells us to keep watch. For example, this verse here, therefore keep watch, because you do not know the day or the hour. He talks about the supervisor servant. The good servant keeps at his task, and the bad supervisor says, boy, the master has taken a long time to get, it's late. I think I'll just, take it easy here, and begins to eat and drink and get drunk and beat the other servants, very irresponsible. And so when the master comes back, he's in big trouble. You go all the way back to the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but who? He doesn't say, but the one who has faith or the one who experiences grace. He says the one who does the will of the Father. That's works, right? And then the more we read about, things in the Gospel of Matthew, we find that our forgiveness, our salvation, the taking away of the guilt of our sins is conditional. We have conditional grace. And here's one of the key conditions right here. For if you forgive other people when they sin against you, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others their sins, your Father will not forgive your sins. And this is part of the Lord's Prayer, right? Forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. I don't like to say that part of the Lord's Prayer. Frankly, I would like to have a lot more abundant forgiveness than I'm willing to give to others generally, So I'd like to kind of soft pedal that part of the Lord's Prayer. So that's all on the work side. And on the grace side, we have these verses we looked at last time. And most of these are from the writing of Paul. Well, people have struggled with this idea in Christianity, is it works or is it grace, for centuries, for thousands of years. And, being this class is not the first time the issue has been raised. So how do we deal with it? Well, quickly, some people talk about the fact that there's imperative grace, and that is to access God's grace. There are certain things we must do. For example, forgive others. It's imperative. And others say, well, grace is indicative. In other words, it shows that you've already been saved. Christianity is a religion which contrasts to most other religions, and that is we behave the way we do because we're saved. We're not working our way to heaven. When we develop this relationship with the Lord, that we become the Lord's people and we begin to act like the Lord. And so it's indicative of something that's already been done. Well, which of those is correct? I just like to say that, well, maybe both of them are correct, and you say that's not really logical. And if we get into the Christian faith, we realize that there are a lot of things in Christianity that are paradoxes. And, I was kind of discipled to believe that it's all about logic. And if we master the Word and come to it with an open mind and apply common sense logic, that we can find out what God wants us to do. And I still believe that to a certain extent, but I think we also have to be willing to say, yes, there are some paradoxes that we have to live with if we're going to follow Jesus. For example, the fact that God is three persons in one. That's not exactly mathematically true, right? Three persons in one, and we have different ways we say there's a triune God. That's kind of like a square circle, right? A triune God. Jesus was both fully human and fully divine. Well, how does that work? God is sovereign, and man has free will. This is the question of predestination we talked about just for a few minutes last week. The kingdom of heaven is already here, but it's not yet. We have one Bible, but we don't follow the Old Testament commands about animal sacrifice because we realize there are two covenants and we're under the New Testament or the New Covenant. It talks about the fact in Ephesians that we are hidden in Christ in the heavenlies already. That's already happened. But we're living on earth. We know that. We're called to be in the world, but not of the world. We're called to be, salt and light. So we're supposed to be worldly, but not worldly at the same time. And then we're saved by grace, by faith through grace, but works matter because that enters into the way we're judged according to the book of Matthew. So these are some paradoxes, and I think that there's a tension there, and we just have to embrace this. This is part of God's way of dealing with us. You say, well, we can't do that. That's completely illogical. Wait a minute now. Most of us that get past middle school science have to accept the fact that light, electromagnetic radiation, is kind of a particle. We call it a photon, right? But it's also a wave. So it's both particle and wave. It's both particle and energy. So So which is it? So we embrace paradoxes in a lot of ways in our life. So we said that the title of this course is Surely He Was the Son of God, or Surely He is the Son of God. That's the name of the course. But at this point where we are right here today, Matthew 25, who really thinks that Jesus is the Son of God? What do each of the following groups think? The people, quote unquote, that's kind of a vague term, but the people there in Jerusalem last week of Jesus' life, who do they think He is? Well, if we read the Gospels, we realize that that's an open question. People are debating that, back and forth. For sure, some people think He is Messiah. They think He's the King. That's going to get Him killed, by the way. King, K-I-N-G, four-letter word, get you killed. And, but there's a debate. Is He a great national figure? Is He a prophet? Is He Messiah? Who is He? The Pharisees, what do they think? Do they think He's the Son of God? Oh, by the way, the people don't seem so much to, they think He's the son of David maybe, but not the Son of God. There's a little difference there. The Pharisees, they think He's a problem. They don't think He's God. They think He's a troublemaker. And pretty much the chief priest and the elders of the people, they've confronted Him. They've tried to trap Him and trick Him, and they're trying to figure out a way to get Him killed. Obviously, they don't think He's the Son of God. Now, the 12, Peter, Andrew, James, and John, those guys, what do they think? Well, we go all the way up to Matthew 16. We're in chapter 25 now, so we've got 9 chapters. And what has Peter already said? Jesus says, well, what about you? Who do you say I am? And Peter said what? You are the Christ, in the old translation, or Messiah, which is what that means. You're Messiah, the Son of the living God, right? And so Peter, kind of acting as spokesman for the group, I think, they kind of realize that he's divine. What we're going to see, though, is as Jesus gets in trouble and gets arrested, they don't really act like He's divine, which I guess is a little bit like you and me, right? We believe that Jesus is God, but we don't act like it a lot of the time. So that's easy for us to identify with. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so they knew the Jews were expecting Messiah to come. As Moses put it, a prophet like me, you must pay attention to everything he tells you. The question is Jesus the one or not? And modern day Jews are still expecting Messiah, and they don't believe that Jesus was Messiah. But here's the idea. Messiah is going to be a prophet like Moses, but is He going to be God? This becomes part of a Christian proposition, if you want to say it, in the book of Acts, and they raise the question that Jesus raised, teaching in the temple. He says, what about Psalm 110? David says, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool to your feet. If David is the ancestor of the Messiah, how does He call Him His Lord? You don't call your descendant, in the Jewish way, you wouldn't call your descendant boss. I mean, they're below you, right? So how does this happen? Well, the only way it works is for Jesus to be both fully human and fully divine. So that's where we are right now. We've talked about the fact that Matthew 25 is the 5th of 5 great teaching sections or discourses or lectures that Jesus gives in Matthew, and they all end with this statement when Jesus had finished saying these things or saying all these things. So everybody can hear, I take it, we're getting good sound. Some of you are struggling to stay awake, but I think you can hear my voice based on your facial expressions. Okay, so we've had this succession of parables going all the way back to the end of chapter 24, and today we're going to deal with the teaching about the sheep and the goats, and maybe that's a little bit parable, a little bit prediction. So sheep and goats, and probably nobody here is qualified to really comment on raising sheep and goats or raising sheep and goats together. I know that Steve is a cowman, so horseman, so he's probably not much into sheep and goats. But anyway, sheep and goats, they graze on different sorts of things. They say goats are a lot smarter than sheep. I think goats are probably not as good to eat as sheep, and goats don't give you wool. At any rate, they're mingled together a lot, and so sometimes the herdsmen find it necessary to separate the sheep and the goats. So let's look at chapter 25, and we're going to start reading in verse 1. Then the kingdom of heaven shall be compared to Let's try verse 31, okay? I'm sorry. Matthew 25, verse 31. Deep breath. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. Before him will be gathered all the nations, and he will separate them one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will place the sheep at his right hand, but the goats at the left. Then the king will say to those on his right hand, Come, O blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me. And then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? And when did we see you, a stranger, and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and visit you? And the king will answer them, Truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these my brethren, you did it to me. And then he will say to those at his left hand, Depart from me, you cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me no drink. I was a stranger, and you did not welcome me. Naked, and you did not clothe me. Sick and in prison, and you did not visit me. And then they will also answer, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison and did not minister to you? And then he will answer them, Truly I say to you, as you did it not to one of the least of these, you did it not to me. And they will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life. Kind of an interesting opening to this section. This is the only time Jesus calls himself king, and he doesn't say, the king is me, but it's pretty obvious that that's what's going on because he says the Son of Man, and that's a term that he uses to refer to himself throughout the book of Matthew. And he talks about coming in all his glory and sitting on his glorious throne. The slide here shows a portion of this text from one of the oldest copies that we have of the book of Matthew, a papyrus dating from someplace between 150 A.D. and 250 A.D. And so, if you're in a class, if you're taking a course, Matthias, you want to know what's going to be on the test, what's going to be on the final, and so you're always trying to, if you or me, you're like the CIA, you're trying to find stuff out, You talk to the people that have had the course last semester. I mean, why would you not? That's what I would do. I'd say, do you have a copy of the test? Because if the test is out there, I'm expected to know it, right? So I want to see a copy of your test, if you've got it. And, I go and I hang out with the teacher, and I just kind of ask leading questions, try to find out what's on the test, because we want to know what's on the test. So Jesus gives us the answer to that. He says it's all about, how you treated these, quote, target populations, the least of these, my brothers and sisters. He talks about the hungry, the thirsty, the strangers, the people that need clothes, the sick, and those in prison.
That talks about works.
Say again?
That's tied in with works. You feed the hungry, you give drink to the thirsty. That's something that God prepared in advance for you as a Christian to do.
Okay, so this goes back to the thing we were struggling with earlier, and that is grace and works. And so clearly, this is on the test. He didn't say, did you profess faith? And he didn't even say, were you baptized? It's did you do these things? Well, I don't want to drive that point too far, but it's a very impactful point, I think we have to admit. So, if we're really going to be judged on how we treated the least of these my brethren, then exactly who are these target populations? Who are the least of these my... And people have had a lot of discussion about this through the years. Some people say, well, Jesus was a Jew, and so his brethren, and there are other places you could cite to support this, were Jews. And so these are persecuted or impoverished Jews that we should be concerned about. And other people say, no, Jesus' family, he's made it clear, people that obey the Lord, that are disciples, and so it's needy Christians. And other people say, well, we're all God's children, so it's anybody that's in need. And here's an idea for you. This is from me. I can't cite some great Greek scholar on this. But what about the least deserving? The least deserving. If you're like me and you've got some resources to help people, you really don't mind helping people that deserve your help, that are trying to live a good moral life, that are hardworking, that are honest, that are diligent, that are not addicted to something, that if you give them something, they're going to do something, they're going to be responsible with it. But what about the people that don't really deserve our help? When we give things away and they leave in a car that's nicer than the car that you can afford or that you allow yourself to afford, how do you feel about that? Or the people that are bound up in addiction or other kinds of dysfunction, and do they really deserve your help? Well, we're going to get more to that in a minute, but I think if we're going to be the hands and feet of Jesus, at some point we've got to say, sometimes I'm going to give away something to somebody that doesn't deserve it. Get comfortable with it. That's going to happen because, after all, the Lord has given us a lot of things we don't deserve, right? So that's just going to be part of it, and we shouldn't get too bent out of shape by it.
We all experience passing by someone on the side of the road who is saying they're, without food, need help. You give it to them, whether they deserve it or not, because they may take it and go out and booze themselves to death, but you're doing what you've been asked to do.
Well, there's some complexity involved here. This is it's easier, I think, for me to stand in the day of judgment before the Lord and say, I gave away too much, instead of, well, I didn't. I was afraid that if I gave it to them, they'd booze themselves to death, as you put it there. So, anyway, let's keep working on this. First of all, I think the Bible is clear that we have a greater responsibility to needy Christians. So, that points to the second bullet here, needy Christians. And this is, 1 John 3:17, if anyone has material possessions and sees a brother or sister in need but has no pity on them, how can the love of God be in that person? And then, as Paul says in Galatians, as we have opportunity, let us do good unto all men, but especially those who belong to the family of believers. I want to say this. I think if needy people realized what would happen if they became a committed, involved, sincere member of this congregation, that this place would explode. Because I've seen a lot of people become part of this congregation, and they are then placed in touch with a network of resources, of contacts, of helping them to find a job, or helping them with health problems, or counseling. Lots of different things open, lots of doors open if you're part of the fellowship here. For years, we have quietly had a program that we call internal benevolence, and it's some of you may have benefited from that process in the past. We try to keep it kind of quiet and unobtrusive, but it's a way for us to help one another. And so there are a lot of ways when a person becomes a part of the family that they have opportunity. But this is because we do have a greater responsibility to our faith family than we do to others. But we also have an opportunity. We also have a responsibility for others. I'd just like to say before we move on out of Matthew 25 that this is kind of the kindergarten of benevolence, okay? This is the kindergarten of prison ministry. This is the kindergarten of hospitality. When Jesus says, if it's a prompt to you and me to see these who are in need as Jesus. And while I really may not be attracted to X as a person, and I'm really not, jumping hand flips about giving them a ride someplace, that's Jesus. That's my chance to give Jesus a ride, So that changes everything, right? So that's Matthew 25. But beyond that, there's an art, there's a discipline, there's a lot to master in really learning how to help people. And in fact, those of you who have tried to do it will agree with me that sometimes, as the book title says here, helping hurts. By doing something for somebody, it's very easy to actually hurt them. So a lot of us several years ago were exposed to this book, When Helping Hurts, and it's really informed this part of our Christian walk. And so we could do a whole course on this, and that's a good thing to do. Some people did that. They got together and conducted a study. Some people in this congregation did it. And it's a great book. This little graph is just one of the concepts in the book. And that is, when we are confronted with someone in need, whether they are sick and in prison or naked or thirsty or hungry, whatever, we need to figure out where they are on this graph. A sudden acute need, like your house burns down or a tornado comes through, or you're stricken by a serious illness, something like that. In that case, the kind of need that you have is relief. You may need a case of bottled water, for example. But that's not where it should end, and that's not always where we want to begin. Because the next step is rehabilitation, is to get that person to assist them, not to do it for them, but to assist them in getting their life back on track. And then finally, a development to help them to get better, in a better place than they were before. I was trying to think of a couple of examples of this, and I was thinking perhaps we become aware, Matthias, of a congregation in a small place, small village in your homeland in Kenya, where they've had such severe drought that the people are facing almost death because of lack of clean drinking water. So we could take up a collection and send them a tanker truck with some water in it. And for a week or two, that would be great. So that's relief. But what they really need there, if there's a appropriate groundwater resource, is they need a well. So maybe we get into rehabilitation, or we could figure out what happened to their previous water supply. The village just didn't grow up by itself. I mean, they had to have a water supply before, right? So is it war? Is it lowered groundwater? What's going on? But maybe we can drill them a well, and then maybe we can begin to see that most of our problems involve a broken relationship with society, a broken relationship with God, a broken relationship with ourselves, and what can we do to help people mend those relationships? Key to this is we don't swoop in and solve everyone's problems, all their problems. We try to help them realize that regardless of what tough shape they're in, they have some resources on their own, and we try to assist them in accessing their own resources. It's a great book, and I'm not doing it justice. At any rate, Jesus points out in this teaching, in this parable, that everyone has the same question. He uses the word also when he gets to the goats. They say, when was it you? We didn't see you in need. And in the end, the way that it works out is everyone is surprised. The sheep are surprised because they didn't realize that what they were doing was for Jesus. And the goats are surprised because they didn't realize they were supposed to be doing these things. They thought they were on the right track. So Jesus is teaching us that the day of judgment is a day of surprises. And basically what he's saying is that heaven is a place for people who've been trying to live the Sermon on the Mount. In chapter, I believe it's 7, he starts off and says, be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. So, when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets to be honored by others. Truly, I tell you, they've received their reward in full. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. I think that's such a beautiful figure of speech here. Don't let your left hand know what your right hand's doing. You know, keep it quiet. Because that's why there's such a surprise. In that we didn't, we were just doing this. We didn't even know you noticed it, Lord. But we didn't know it was you. We didn't know you. It's just something that they did naturally and quietly. Well, I'd like to move on from there and kind of zoom back out from the book of Matthew and point out that the conclusion of this thing is the goats, they get sent to the bad place, eternal punishment. And it talks about the fact that they will be sent to a place where there's eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. That's 25:41, the verse at the very bottom there. This font is kind of small, and I won't put my wife on this spot by asking her if she can read this slide. But anyway, I have been informed that some people can't read all the slides. So, just take my word for it. All this highlighting here is weeping and gnashing of teeth. And this seems to be one of Jesus' favorite phrases in his speaking is there's going to be a bad place, and when you get there, there's going to be weeping and gnashing of teeth. I was trying to explain this. I was telling the parable of the net on Wednesday night to the little kids, and I was trying to explain what gnashing of teeth is. And I said, when something hurts you really bad, you grit your teeth like this. That hurts. That's gnashing of teeth, I think. That's what gnashing of teeth is. Now, let's play a little thought experiment, a little game here, a little thought experiment. Let's say that it's time for our congregation to get some kind of minister, youth minister, preaching minister, campus minister, something or another. And you, Robert, you're on the search committee. Now, I know that may be far-fetched, but you could find yourself on the search committee. That's wonderful, isn't it? And so we see a resume, very impressive. We invite this person to come here and preach and teach a little bit, kind of get a feel for who they are. And it's Jesus, but we don't know that. It's Jesus, but we don't know that, okay? Now just play along with me, okay? This guy's really a powerful speaker. They tell great illustrations. They're great, but it seems like just about every time they speak, they get to this part about hell. They get to this part about punishment, and they keep talking about weeping and gnashing of teeth. And so you and the search committee, you're having a meeting back there in the room, and, you say, man, this guy's really, maybe I'm on the committee, and I say, this guy's really good. And he's got glowing recommendations, but he just seems to be awfully negative, awfully bleak. All this talk about eternal punishment. People today are under a lot of pressure in their lifestyles and so forth. And, they want something positive, something encouraging. And it seems like this is just going to drive people away if we always are stressing this business about eternal punishment and hell and weeping and gnashing of teeth. And, maybe we should just pass on this guy and find somebody that's a little more upbeat. And that would attract people, don't you think? And you see where I'm going with this thing. Because you and I don't get to say what the gospel is. If you go out and look on the sign on the outside of the building, it doesn't say the Church of Doug. We could do that. Nobody would come, right? It doesn't say the Church of, it doesn't say the Church of Sing Song. Sorry. It doesn't. It says the Church of Christ. So if we're the Church of Christ, then we have to proclaim His gospel and His message. We don't get to edit it. We don't get to edit it. It's in there for a reason. Okay, that's my thought. Now, chapter 26, and we'll just start here and kind of set things up for a study of the Last Supper next time. As I told you, these 5 great sections of teaching all end the same way. Chapter 26, verse 1 is where we kind of draw a line. When Jesus had finished all these sayings, he said to his disciples, "You know that after 2 days the Passover is coming, and the Son of Man will be delivered up to be crucified." Then the chief priest and the elders of the people gathered in the palace of the high priest, who was called Caiaphas, and took counsel together in order to arrest Jesus by stealth and kill him. But they said, "Not during the feast, lest there be a tumult among the people." Now, when Jesus was at Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, a woman came up to him with an alabaster jar of very expensive ointment, and she poured it on his head as he sat at the table. But when the disciples saw it, they were indignant, saying, "Why this waste? For this ointment might have been sold for a large sum and given to the poor." But Jesus, aware of this, said to them, "Why do you trouble the woman? For she's done a beautiful thing to me. For you always have the poor with you, but you will not always have me. In pouring this ointment on my body, she has done it to prepare me for the burial. Truly I say to you, wherever the gospel is preached in the whole world, what she has done will be told in memory of her." And then one of the 12, who was called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priest and said, "What will you give me if I deliver him to you?" And they paid him 30 pieces of silver, and from that moment he sought an opportunity to betray him. Now on the first day of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus saying, "Where will you have us to prepare for you to eat the Passover?" And he said, "Go into the city to such a one and say to him, 'The teacher says, my time is at hand. I will keep the Passover at your house with my disciples.'" And the disciples did as Jesus had directed them, and they prepared the Passover. And the editors of some of the translations have put a heading over chapter 26, and they've called it "The Plot Against Jesus." And it seems to me that we have 2 plans, the way that I read this: Plan A and Plan B. And God's plan is Plan A. And Jesus says, "I will be crucified at Passover." The Passover is 2 days away, and that's when I'm going to be crucified. The bad guys, the chief priest and the elders of the people get together, and they have their meeting, and they say, "We need to get rid of this guy, but it will trigger a riot if we just grab him in the temple." We've got all these people from all over the place here for Passover, for the days of unleavened bread, last a week. Said, let's let the crowd start home, then we'll grab him. But their plan gets changed to match God's plan. We talk about Jesus at dinner at the house of someone named Simon the leper. The similar incident occurs, you may remember, in Luke chapter 7 at the house of Simon the Pharisee, but these are obviously 2 different events there. The woman anoints his feet and so forth, and Jesus has this interaction with Simon the Pharisee. There are similar accounts near the end of Jesus' life in Mark 14 and John 12. In John 12, it's not the disciples that say, "Why this waste?" It is Judas, and it says that Judas didn't really care about the poor. He wanted the money. He was skimming the top for himself. And so, you know, this question of benevolence is a big one, and I'm pleased and happy that we have benevolence in our budget here, even under the constrained situation we find ourselves now with our contribution going down, and that many of you participate in benevolent acts out of your own pocket, not through the church treasury. I think it's sad that we don't have a larger percentage of our giving that is dedicated to benevolence, but a lot of benevolent ministries are funded by our year-end contribution. So we can give as much money as we want to benevolent works in the year-end contribution, which is usually the first or second Sunday in December, and many of you do because we end up with a very substantial gift at that time. Anyway, in this case, Jesus said, yeah, giving to the poor is always a good idea, but there are other things too. So some people say, well, you know, a beautiful worship service, a great PA system, beautiful auditorium, you know, well-educated preacher. These are all parts of ways that we honor Jesus. And so there's a live discussion about how we balance benevolence with all these other things. Now, it's pretty despicable on Judas' part that it wasn't like somebody pressured him to betray Jesus. Instead, he saw a way to make some money, and so he volunteers the chief priest. What will you give me? What will you give me? He goes out and looking for it, and so this changes their plans, at least in my way of thinking. They say, well, we've got a golden opportunity. With this guy's help, we don't have to grab him in the temple. We can grab him at night, because this guy will tell us where he goes at night, and so we can go get him and get him to the Romans before people realize what's going on, and then the Romans will take care of business. 30 pieces of silver is kind of symbolic, because in the law of Moses, that was what a slave was worth. So what did Judas give for the 30 pieces of silver? Specifically, what did he give? We say, well, he betrayed Jesus. And I'd like to say is that he led the mob to the garden where they could catch Jesus alone. He gave them information, and he identified Jesus. You know, Jesus didn't have his picture on social media or something back then. He had to kiss him and say, this is Jesus. This is the one you're looking for. Here's a real problem that we have as we try to harmonize the Gospels, and I call it a calendar problem. And the first three Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, that we call the synoptic Gospels, that word just means seen the same way, and they're very similar. They all seem to indicate that the Last Supper was a Passover meal. Just like we just read, Jesus says, you go talk to this guy and tell him we want to eat our Passover. They said, where do you want to eat the Passover this year? He says, well, I know somebody in Jerusalem, this guy. You go to this address, you tell the guy, I want to use your upper room. And he'll say, fine, you can do it. So it seems like that Last Supper was the Passover. On the other hand, in the Gospel of John, it's the day that they take Jesus to Pilate's house, which is, you know, the next morning. Jesus, the Last Supper, goes to the garden, arrested, trials during the night, beat Jesus up, all that sort of. Then the next morning, early in the morning, they take him to Pilate. Well, the Jews, this is the height of hypocrisy. The Jewish leaders don't want to go inside Pilate's palace because that would make them unclean. Here they're plotting to murder an innocent man, and they're worried about being clean. So they don't want to go inside, so they make Pilate come outside to them. At any rate, they don't want to be unclean so they can eat the Passover. Not because they did eat, because they're about to eat it with their families or whatever. So John has the Passover in the future. In fact, in chapter 19 and verse 14, he says this was the day of preparation for the Passover. And so that was the day that Jesus was taken to the cross, and he died as the sun went down, and that was the beginning of the Passover. Or the sun was darkened, so that would be the beginning of the Passover. According to the Jewish thought, the day begins at sundown. Well, how do we resolve this? I don't have a way to resolve it easily this morning, except to say, here are some solutions people have suggested through the years. First of all, people say, well, the Gospels are not inspired. They're just, works written by men, and they didn't get their stuff together, and there are 4 different Gospels, and everybody has a different story. I don't believe that. We could say the Last Supper was, in fact, a special meal, and there's a word for this, kiddush, but not the Passover. I don't think that really agrees with what we read in Matthew. The one that I kind of lean toward is that there were different calendars that people used. I think that in the Eastern Orthodox Christian tradition that they have a different date for Christmas. It's in January sometime, I think. So at any rate, there is evidence that the first century Jews, that they didn't all agree on exactly what day Passover was supposed to be. And so maybe Jesus and his followers were Galilean Jews, and they had one date for Passover, and the leaders in Jerusalem had a different one. So that's my thought about how we can resolve this difficult question about the Passover, what day the calendar was. At any rate, I don't think that's terribly essential for us to understand and appreciate what's about to occur, and that's Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection. So we'll be studying the Last Supper in some detail next Sunday with Matt. I hope you'll all be here and participate in that study together.